Hey, welcome back to Chips and Salsa, where we talk about security and intel. I'm Jerry.
I'm Krobe, and today we have Arun Gupta. He's a VP and general manager here at Intel, and he is really a huge contributor and participant with a lot of Intel's open source foundation efforts. So let's flip over and talk with him.
Okay,
All right, Jerry. Today we have our very special guest, Arun. Arun, do you want to introduce yourself and talk about your role here at Intel?
Absolutely. My name is Arun Gupta. I've joined here about 9 months ago. Super happy and excited to be here. I'm the VP and the GM for Open Ecosystem team here. And what that means is, my team is responsible for defining, driving, and executing an implementation of open ecosystem strategy. And people get confused. What is open ecosystem? Open ecosystem, essentially, if you think about it, is a combination of all the work that we do in open source for sure, but a lot more. Like we do a lot of work with open standards, open API, open hardware. So all of that work, my team works across the company, bringing that corporate wide alignment and having a consolidated strategy around it.
Mhm.
so Arun, what is Open.Intel and how is Intel involved in open source security?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about Open.Intel, part of that answer was in the previous question as well. Like my team, Open.Intel essentially is the code name for the open ecosystem team. And if you think about Open.Intel.com is our public website as well. So publicly, we are more commonly known as, oh, this is the Open.Intel team. So I get that part. But internally, we are all about strategy, execution, implementation, driving. So whether it's the DevRel aspect of it, whether it's the events aspect of it, whether it's the strategy aspect of it, whether it's the internal, external comms aspect of it, all of that is what my teams fill in. Now, the second part of the question was about open source security. Now, if you think about, there are 19,000 plus software engineers at Intel. We That's a lot. That's a big number. People think that, oh, we're a hardware company primarily. Sure, we are, but there are lots and lots of software engineers. We are one of the top corporate contributors to Linux kernel. Not one of the top. We are the top corporate contributor for last 15 years. We are one of the top corporate contributor to Linux among the top 10. Ditto with OpenJDK, PyTorch, TensorFlow, Python, UPicket, LLVM. All these are hardcore software projects, completely community managed and all in open source. And the way Intel thinks about this is, we need the reason we contribute to these projects is to make sure that these projects are fully optimized for Intel silicon as they're coming about. Now, security is rule number one. So we need to make sure that as we are contributing features to these open source projects, they continue to stay secure, they continue to stay maintainable, and done it in a way where we're not just breaking the project. It's backwards compatible, is secure, and our customers feel comfortable and confident. So that's why open source security is super super fundamental to everything that we do within Intel.
Mhm. That's cool. And I know, in addition to being participants and contributors to these projects, Intel also works with a lot of open source foundations. Could you maybe describe a little bit about that activity?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if you think about open source, what is the element? Code is of course the king, in open source. There is no doubt about that. But in addition to code, a lot of the work happens, in projects, in discussions, in the leadership meetings, events. And what are these open source foundations? So let's take an example of, say, Cloud Native Computing Foundation.
Mhm.
This foundation is a home to 140 cloud native projects. Kubernetes is one of them, etcd, Prometheus, so all of these are part of that. Ditto with Linux Foundation. Linux Foundation is a parent foundation of CNCF and is a host of about 800 plus most popular open source projects on the planet. So I think in that sense, Intel is part of 700 plus open source foundations and standard bodies. So that's one part of it. And then usually when we join a foundation, we usually join at the top tier because we want to be Typically when you join a foundation, you could join at multiple tiers, but we end up trying to join at the top tier because that gives us usually a board seat or a bit more administrative seat where we can actually strategically be more influential in the foundation and the community. For example, Linux Foundation, we are a top tier member over there. We were the founding members of Linux Foundation. And as a matter of fact, I am one of the board representatives from Intel on the Linux Foundation. Similarly, with Cloud Native Computing Foundation, I am the board representative for Intel on the CNCF governing board, and I'm also the governing board chair as well. And ditto with, say, OpenSSF, Open Source Security Foundation, which is again like a child foundation of Linux Foundation, and I'm on the governing board. So I think being on the governing board, you get to know what is happening in the foundation. Usually these foundations have sort of an administrative aspect that is all done typically by the governing board, and then there's a technical aspect which is usually done by sort of the technical body of it. So I think that's a good split, and usually we end up having representation in both elements, the governing board and the technical board.
Mhm.
um, for example, you are on the technical advisory committee of OpenSSF,
Right.
and similarly, we have Kathy Zhang, who's on the technical oversight committee of CNCF. So, being on the foundation, again, both on the administrative and the technical side, allows us to bring that influence and make sure we are helping the foundation in the best possible way.
That's great. So I think there's obviously benefit in doing these things for Intel and our customers, but how do you see this impacting the communities? How does the community and the ecosystem benefit from our involvement?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you think about, pick any foundation for that sake, let's go to back to CNCF. That's the one that I'm most familiar with and most deeply involved with for a number of years now. A project like Kubernetes, there are contributions to the project by over 4,000 companies, by about 80,000 developers across the world. One of the biggest advantages that foundations provide is the scale. Like if Kubernetes was to be just a Google project, imagine the drama around it. Who would be able to contribute, who would not be able to contribute? But now these foundations really provide you a neutral home, a standard governance model where it's not just one company that has the maintainers on the project, but it's truly multi-org governance. It's truly neutral copyright, neutral trademark. The foundation provides support for your CI/CD framework, which the project maintainers don't have to worry about. So I think there are a lot of advantages and benefits. Anybody who jumping into the project can straight away focus on the technical aspects of project as opposed to figuring out, is the project going to sustain? If I'm going to contribute my work, is somebody else going to steal my work? And how is that going to work? I'm a junior developer. If I'm going to contribute to the project, would anybody listen to me? So I think that's the psychological safety at different levels that these foundations provide. So overall, as they say, 1 plus 1 is 11, and foundations, I think, are a very clear example where it demonstrates that.
Mhm. So let's take a few moments to talk about one of my favorite foundations, the OpenSSF, the Open Source Security Foundation. Can you maybe talk a little bit about why Intel feels it's important for us to be seen and participate and that community is successful?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you think about OpenSSF, what is the purpose of OpenSSF? They are really trying to raise the security posture of open source. And as I talked about, security is job number one. We need to make sure that whatever we ship, deliver, security is there. It has to be given. It's a non-negotiable fact. Um, and as I talked about how Intel has 19,000 plus software engineers, thousands of them contributing to open source. So anything that we can do, you know, to influence and raise the security bar of those open source projects not only benefits us, but the broader industry. And as they say, a rising tide lifts all the boats. One of the philosophies that we have at Intel is it would be a very selfish place if we just want to make it secure for us. any problem, like think about log4shell, think about zlib, think about openssl. These are the projects that are really used by everybody in the industry. So the problems that we are facing in terms of making these projects secure is not just our problem, it's truly an industry problem. And so why work in a silo by ourselves when we can actually partner with our industry and make this overall a better deal? So one of the particular initiatives of OpenSSF is the OpenSSF scorecard, for example. It's a wonderful way by which you can say, hey, here is my repo and here is how it is rated on security, for example. You could get a score from 1 to 10, kind of that kind of gives you an indication. Now, we are deeply involved in making sure those OpenSSF scorecards are adopted. You know, we had a discussion within our team a few weeks ago. What if all of github.com/intel could start adopting those OpenSSF scorecards? And the lessons that we learn from that adopting inside Intel could be really applied back to the GitHub repo or the working group where the work is happening. So, really, the biggest benefit is to Intel specifically. These are not only our problems, but these are also industry problems. So, working with everybody in the industry is only going to help everybody and make our open source software that much more secure.
Very nice.
Yeah. So Arun, thank you. Any parting thoughts or comments?
I would say open source has been sort of the bead or the thread across all the beads of my career, of my life. um, some of the people that I've been working in the industry across multiple companies, I've worked with them for, gosh, almost 2 decades and across multiple companies, but the relationship has stayed strong. So I think open source is really that common binding factor across everything that I've done. And I'm really excited, really fortunate, I would say, very gratitude towards the opportunity that Intel provides me to participate in this, their trust in me that I will do the right thing, not only for Intel, but for the broader industry. So I would say I'm very, very thankful for that opportunity for me.
Nice.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us today and talking about Intel's participation and investments in open source and assorted open source foundations. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, that's a lot of information and a lot of activity and involvement from Intel in the open source community. Of course, I know, Crow, that you participate in OpenSSF and other
I
open
do.
source initiatives. So this is probably no surprise to you, right?
No, this was all great stuff, but it's nice to hear just kind of the totality of all these different areas Intel's participating in. Makes me pretty proud.
Right on. Well, thanks, Arun, and thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.